Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Dr. Noura Mustafa, lecturer of medical biochemistry. Today, inshallah, we are going to discuss minerals. Our objectives today is to classify minerals present in our body, to study macronutrients, their functions and clinical conditions related to their excess or deficiency, and lastly, to define trace elements, their functions, and also clinical conditions related to their excess and deficiency. First, minerals are classified according to our body needs into macronutrients. These macronutrients are required in amounts greater than 100 mg per day. They include calcium, phosphorus, sodium potassium chloride, and lastly magnesium. While trace elements are required in amounts less than 100 mg per day, they include iron, copper, zinc, selenium, chromium, cobalt, iodine, fluoride, and manganese. We will begin by macronutrients, beginning with calcium and phosphorus. The normal plasma level of calcium is 9 to 11 mg per deciliter. This level is very important to memorize. So this level is very important to memorize, 9 to 11 mg per deciliter. Calcium-rich food sources include milk and milk products, eggs, nuts, cabbage, cauliflower. As regards the absorption of calcium, the absorption of calcium occurs in the upper intestine by calcium-binding protein. It occurs by simple diffusion or active transport, which requires active form of vitamin D. Calcium-phosphorus ratio important for absorption of both of them is 1 to 1. So this is the ideal ratio or optimum ratio for their maximum absorption. Calcium absorption can be increased by calcitriol. The calcitriol is the active form of vitamin D. Active form of vitamin D. Calcitriol increases calcium absorption. Calcitriol is also called 1,25-dihydroxycholecalciferol. 1,25-dihydroxycholecalciferol. Vitamin D will be discussed in details in vitamins. So calcitriol, the active form of vitamin D, this increases calcium absorption. Also, calcium absorption is increased by parathyroid hormone through the activation of vitamin D. So parathyroid hormone activates vitamin D and in turn increases calcium absorption. The alkaline pH decreases calcium solubility, so it decreases calcium absorption, while acidic pH increases calcium absorption by increasing calcium solubility. Lastly, dietary factors. Lactose and high protein diet leads to increased calcium absorption. Other salts like phytate, oxalate, tannic acid, which is present in tea, and fatty acids, all of these decreases calcium absorption. So calcium absorption occurs in upper intestine by calcium binding protein. It occurs by simple diffusion or active transport. The absorption of calcium requires the synthesis or require the presence of active form of vitamin D. Calcitriol, which is the active form of vitamin D, it increases calcium absorption. Parathyroid hormone also increases calcium absorption through activation of vitamin D. The alkaline contents or alkaline pH decreases calcium solubility, so it decreases calcium absorption, while on the other hand, acidic pH increases calcium absorption by increasing calcium solubility. Lactose and high protein diet increases calcium absorption, while phytate, oxalate, tannate, all of these decreases calcium absorption. So the calcium absorption is increased by calcitriol, parathyroid hormone, acidic pH, and high protein diet, while decreased by phytate, oxalate, tannic acid, and also decreased by alkaline pH. The functions of calcium. The calcium is very important in calcification of bone and teeth or mineralization of bone and teeth. Also, it's very important in blood clotting. So the first two begins with B, bone and blood. So bone and teeth mineralization, also blood clotting. The second two begins with M, muscle and membrane. It's very important for membrane permeability and muscle contraction. It's very important for muscle contraction and membrane permeability. The last two begins with S, second messenger of many hormones, and also is very important for the activity of many enzymes as lipase and phosphorylase. So the functions of calcium 2B, 2M, and 2S. Bone and blood, muscle and membrane, second messenger, and some enzymes, activity of some enzymes. So it's very important for bone and teeth mineralization, blood clotting, membrane permeability, muscle contraction, second messenger of many hormones, and activity of some enzymes as lipase and phosphorylase. These are food sources rich in phosphorus, of course seafood, nuts, chicken. The functions of phosphorus include bone and teeth also mineralization together with calcium, bone and teeth mineralization together with calcium. Also very important functions it share in the synthesis of nucleic acids. Nucleotides are formed of nitrogenous base, sugar, and phosphate. So the phosphorus is very important in the synthesis of nucleic acids. Also in energy transfer in the form of ATP. This is the energy currency of the cell. So it's very important in energy transfer in the form of ATP, and also coenzymes, synthesis of coenzymes like TBP and NADP. Synthesis of coenzymes like TBP and NADP. Also is very important for acid-base balance. There is a phosphate buffer which share in the acid-base balance. So functions of phosphorus is very important for bone and teeth mineralization, energy in the form of ATP. Also it shares in the synthesis of nucleic acid or nucleotides, very important, coenzymes like NADP, and acid-base balance. So bone and teeth mineralization, energy and coenzyme, energy and coenzyme. Lastly, nucleic acid and acid-base balance. Nucleic acid and acid-base balance. So again, it's very important for bone and teeth mineralization, energy and coenzyme. Enzyme, coenzyme, and energy. So energy transfer in the form of ATP and coenzyme. And lastly, nucleic acid and acid-base balance. How is blood phosphorus and calcium, blood calcium and phosphorus controlled? They are controlled mainly by three hormones. The first one is calcitriol, which is the active form of vitamin D. The second one is parathyroid hormone, and then lastly the third one is calcitonin. So calcitriol, active form of vitamin D, parathyroid hormone, and calcitonin. The calcitriol, it increases both calcium and phosphorus levels to normal. It increases both calcium and phosphorus levels to normal. So it doesn't increase them above normal, no, it increases them just to normal level by increasing their intestinal absorption of both of them, calcium and phosphorus. It increases their intestinal absorption, and also it increases their renal reabsorption. As regard bone, if the calcium level is normal, it helps to deposit calcium and phosphorus into bone, so it helps in bone mineralization. So if calcium level is normal, it helps to deposit calcium and phosphorus in bone, so it helps in bone mineralization. While if calcium level is low, if blood calcium level is low, it helps to destruct bone and releases calcium and phosphorus into the blood in order to increase their levels in the blood to normal. So again, it increases their intestinal absorption of both calcium and phosphorus, increases the renal reabsorption, and lastly, if the calcium level is normal, it helps to deposit calcium and phosphorus into bone, helping in bone mineralization, while if blood calcium level is low, it helps to destroy bone in order to increase in calcium and phosphorus in the blood to normal level. So it helps to increase both calcium and phosphorus level to normal levels in the blood. The second hormone is parathyroid hormone. It is released in response to low plasma level calcium, low plasma level of calcium. So if there is blood calcium level is low, parathyroid hormone is released in order to increase calcium and decrease phosphorus levels. It increases calcium and it decreases phosphorus level. Lastly, calcitonin, it is released from thyroid gland to decrease both calcium level and phosphorus. So calcitonin is released when the blood calcium level is high. It leads to decrease both calcium level and phosphorus. So calcitriol increases both of them to normal level. Parathyroid increases calcium and decreases phosphorus. So it's only released when blood calcium level is low in order to increase it. Calcitonin is released if the blood calcium level is high, so it decreases both blood calcium and phosphorus. Lastly, the disorders of calcium level, it includes both hypocalcemia and hypercalcemia. Hypocalcemia, hypo means decrease, calc means calcium, and emia means blood. So this is decreased calcium level in the blood. If the calcium level is below 8.8 milligram per deciliter. While on the other hand, hypercalcemia, hyper means increase and calcemia means calcium in the blood. So this is increased calcium level in the blood above 11 milligram per deciliter. If it falls below 7.5 milligram per deciliter, it leads to a condition called tetany. Tetany is the increased neuromuscular irritability. Tetany is the case of increased neuromuscular irritability. If there is chronic decrease, this leads to a disorder called rickets in children and osteomalacia in adults. So if there is chronic decrease, it leads to rickets. This is a condition of rickets in children, or osteomalacia in adults. Osteomalacia in adults. On the other hand, if the calcium level is high, above 11 milligram per deciliter, it may cause calcification in soft tissues. It may cause calcium deposits in arteries and calcium stone in the kidney. Of course, if the calcium level is low, this can be caused by hypoparathyroidism, because parathyroid hormone increases calcium level. So if the parathyroid hormone is low, so this leads to decreased calcium level and hypocalcemia. And also vitamin D deficiency, because the vitamin D increases calcium level to normal. So if it is below normal, so this is a case of vitamin D deficiency. So both of them, if parathyroid hormone is low or vitamin D is low, this leads to decreased calcium level. On the other hand, if the parathyroid hormone is high or vitamin D is high, hyperparathyroidism or vitamin D toxicity, of both of them, any of them is high, this leads to increased calcium level, and this is a condition of hypercalcemia. So calcium level, as regards calcium and the phosphorus, we discussed that the plasma level of calcium is 9 to 11 milligram per deciliter. Is very important level to memorize. The sources of calcium, of course, is present in milk and milk products, nuts, cabbage, cauliflower. The absorption of calcium occurs in the upper small intestine by calcium binding protein. Is very important. Calcium binding protein is synthesized under the effect of active form of vitamin D. It occurs in the upper small intestine by calcium binding protein. The factors affecting calcium absorption include calcitriol, which increases calcium absorption. Parathyroid hormone increases also calcium absorption. And dietary factors and the media. The dietary factors include lactose and high protein diet. Both of them increases calcium absorption. Phytate, lactate, oxalate, tannic acid, all of these decreases calcium absorption. Acidic pH increases calcium absorption, and alkaline pH decreases calcium absorption. The calcium absorption, of course, occurs by simple diffusion or active transport under the effect of active form of vitamin D. The functions of calcium, as we mentioned, to be bone and blood clotting, bone mineralization, bone and teeth mineralization, blood clotting. 2M, membrane and muscle, membrane permeability, muscle contraction and nerve conduction. Second messenger, 2S, second messenger of hormones, and also for activity of some enzymes. The functions of phosphorus include, the first one is also bone mineralization, bone and teeth mineralization. The second one is nucleic acid, very important, nucleic acid formation and acid-base balance. And then energy transfer, ATP, and the coenzyme like NADP. The control of blood calcium and phosphorus under the control of 3 hormones. Calcitriol, active form of vitamin D, increases calcium and phosphorus level to normal by increasing intestinal absorption, increasing the renal reabsorption, and as regard bone, if calcium level is normal, it helps in mineralization of bone and teeth, the calcium and the phosphorus deposition in bone. While if the calcium level is low, it helps in bone resorption, destruction of bone, and releases of calcium and phosphorus to blood in order to retain their normal level. The parathyroid hormone increases calcium and decreases phosphorus. Calcitonin decreases both of them, decreases calcium and phosphorus. As regards disorders of calcium, hypocalcemia and hypercalcemia. Hypocalcemia below 8.8, if it falls below 7.5, it leads to tetany. Chronic decrease leads to rickets in children and osteomalacia in adults. Of course, hypocalcemia is caused by decrease any of parathyroid hormone or vitamin D. On the other hand, hypercalcemia, if calcium level above 11 milligram per deciliter, it causes calcification in soft tissues, stones in the kidney, calcium deposits in arteries, and of course, hypercalcemia means increased calcium level, so it's caused by increased parathyroid hormone or increase vitamin D. And now moving to sodium, potassium, and chloride. Both sodium and chloride are present in, of course, in table salt, cheese, butter, whole grains, while potassium is present in meat, chicken, fruits like bananas. Sodium and chloride, both of them, sodium and chloride, both of them are extracellular. So they are present outside cells. Sodium and chloride, both of them are extracellular. While sodium is a cation carrying positive charge, while chloride is anion carrying negative charge. So both of them, sodium and chloride, are present extracellular, but sodium is cation carrying positive charge, while chloride is anion carrying negative charge. The potassium is present intracellular cation, so it carries positive charge, but it is present inside the cell. It is intracellular. The level of potassium is very important. It's 3.5 to 5 milliequivalent per liter. Sodium is 132 to 146 milliequivalent per liter, and lastly chloride is 94 to 106 milliequivalent per liter. The level of potassium is very important to memorize. It is 3.5 to 5 milliequivalent per liter. As regards their functions, all of them, sodium, potassium, and chloride, are very important in the regulation of acid-base balance. They are very important in the regulation of acid-base balance. Also, maintenance of osmotic pressure and water balance. Maintenance of osmotic pressure and water balance. So all of them, sodium, potassium, and chloride, are very important in regulation of acid-base balance, maintenance of osmotic pressure, and water balance. Sodium and potassium are important for the excitability of the muscle and cell permeability. Excitability of the muscle and cell permeability. While chloride is important for the synthesis of HCl or the formation of HCl in the stomach. Sodium is important for conduction of nerve impulse. Potassium is important for many metabolic processes as protein synthesis and metabolism of glycogen. Glycogenolysis, lysis means breakdown, so this is the breakdown of glycogen. Glycogenesis means formation, so the synthesis of glycogen. So it's important in both breakdown and the synthesis of glycogen, and also in protein synthesis. Lastly, chloride is important for activation of enzyme called salivary amylase. So all of them, sodium, potassium, and chloride, are important for regulation of acid-base balance, maintenance of osmotic pressure, and water balance. Sodium and potassium, both of them, important for the muscle excitability and cell permeability. Muscle excitability and cell permeability, and sodium also is important for nerve conduction. The Cl is important for the formation of HCl in the stomach and the activation of salivary amylase. The potassium is important for many metabolic processes as protein synthesis and metabolic processes of glycogen, both lysis and formation, both breakdown and formation of glycogen. As regards disorders of both plasma level of sodium and potassium, adrenal cortex secretes hormone called glucocorticoids. These glucocorticoids, when they increase, it increases sodium level in the blood. Hyper means increase, natremia means sodium in the blood. So if there is increased glucocorticoids, which is secreted from the adrenal cortex, so hyperactivity of adrenal cortex, increased glucocorticoids like cortisone, all of these leads to hypernatremia. It increases sodium in the blood, and at the same time it decreases potassium in the blood. So also hyperactivity of adrenal cortex leads to hypokalemia. So hyperactivity of adrenal cortex or glucocorticoid increases sodium and at the same time decreases potassium in the blood. On the other hand, if there is adrenocortical insufficiency, means decreased glucocorticoid, this will decrease sodium level in the blood and also at the same time increase potassium in the blood. Also, thiazide diuretics, these form of diuretics excrete large amounts of potassium, so it leads to hypokalemia. On the other hand, in diabetic ketoacidosis, in which the insulin is deficient, normally insulin helps the passage of potassium to inside the cells. So if there is insulin deficiency, like in diabetic ketoacidosis, the potassium level will increase in the blood. So again, as regards sodium, potassium, and chloride, all of them are very important in maintenance of acid-base balance, osmotic pressure, and water balance. acid-base balance, water balance, and osmotic pressure. Sodium and potassium are important for muscle excitability and cell permeability. Sodium is also important in nerve conduction. Potassium is important in metabolic processes like protein synthesis, glycogenolysis, and glycogenesis. Chloride is very important in the formation of HCl in the stomach and the activation of salivary amylase. As regards the disorders of sodium and potassium, hypernatremia and hypokalemia. Hypernatremia means increased sodium, so increased glucocorticoid hyperactivity of adrenal cortex. And at the same time, hypokalemia. Both of them are the same causes. Hypernatremia, so hyperactivity of adrenal cortex. Hyperactivity of adrenal cortex leads to hypernatremia and at the same time hypokalemia. While on the other hand, adrenocortical insufficiency will lead to hyponatremia. Insufficiency will lead to hyponatremia, the same as sodium. And on the other hand, the potassium will increase hyperkalemia. Also, the hyperkalemia occur in diabetic ketoacidosis, in which the insulin is deficient because the potassium will increase in the blood. Sodium and the chloride, both of them are extracellular. Sodium is a cation, while chloride is anion. On the other hand, the potassium is intracellular cation. And now moving to magnesium. 70% of magnesium is distributed together with calcium and phosphorus in bones. The other 30% is present in other tissue and the body fluids. It's very important for the activity of many enzymes like kinases and phosphorylases. These are very important enzymes in metabolism. Okay, so magnesium is an important activator for many enzymes like kinases and phosphorylases. Also, is very important as cofactor for DNA and RNA synthesis, and also for nerve impulse conduction. So the magnesium is important as activator for enzymes like kinases and phosphorylase, coenzyme in DNA and RNA synthesis, also important for nerve impulse conduction. So again, now we have finished the macronutrients. We have already discussed the calcium, phosphorus, sodium, potassium, and chloride, and lastly magnesium. As regards the calcium and the phosphorus, we mentioned the calcium level is 9 to 11 milligram per deciliter. Of course, calcium is present in milk products, nuts, cabbage, cauliflower. The calcium is absorbed in the upper small intestine by calcium binding protein, either by simple diffusion or active transport under the effect of active form of vitamin D. The calcitriol increases calcium. Both calcitriol and parathyroid hormone increases calcium absorption. Acidic pH increases calcium absorption. Alkaline pH decreases calcium absorption. High protein diet increases calcium absorption, while phytate, tannic acid, fatty acids, all of them decreases calcium absorption. Functions of calcium: 2B, 2M, and 2S. 2B, bone and blood, bone and teeth mineralization, blood clotting. 2M, muscle and membrane permeability and muscle excitability and nerve conduction. Lastly, 2S, second messenger of many hormones and some enzymes, for it's very important for activity of some enzymes. Control of blood calcium and phosphorus. We have three main hormones: calcitriol, parathyroid hormone, and calcitonin. The calcitriol, it increases both calcium and phosphorus to normal level. The parathyroid hormone increases calcium and decreases phosphorus, while calcitonin lastly decreases, both of them decreases calcium and phosphorus. The disorders include hypocalcemia and hypercalcemia. Hypocalcemia less than 8.8, hypercalcemia more than 11. Hypocalcemia leads to tetany. If there is chronic decrease, it leads to rickets in children and osteomalacia in adults. While the hypercalcemia leads to calcification, calcium deposits in arteries, calcium stones in the kidney. Hypocalcemia means decrease parathyroid hormone or vitamin D. Hypercalcemia can be caused by increased parathyroid hormone or increased vitamin D. So now we have finished calcium and phosphorus. Moving to sodium, potassium, and chloride. Sodium and chloride are extracellular. Sodium cation and chloride is anion. Potassium is intracellular cation. Potassium level is 3.5 to 5 milliequivalent per liter. All of them are very important for maintenance of acid-base balance, water balance, and osmotic pressure. Sodium and potassium are important for muscle excitability and cell permeability, and the sodium is important in nerve conduction. Potassium is important in metabolic processes like protein synthesis and glycogen metabolism. The chloride is important in the formation of HCl in the stomach and activation of salivary amylase. Lastly, the disorders of sodium and potassium. Hypernatremia like hypokalemia. Hypernatremia, the same causes as hypokalemia, hyperactivity of adrenal cortex or increased cortisol. Hypokalemia is also caused by thiazide diuretics, while hyponatremia, which is caused by adrenocortical insufficiency, like hyperkalemia, which is also caused by diabetic ketoacidosis. Moving to magnesium, as we mentioned, it's important activator for some enzymes like kinases and phosphorylases, also very important in bone, nucleic acid formation, DNA and RNA synthesis, and lastly, is very important in membrane excitability. And now moving to trace elements. The first trace element is iron. Iron is present in both animal and plant sources, is present in meat, liver, egg yolk, Spanish nuts, dates. The absorption of iron occurs in the upper small intestine. It is well controlled to meet the body needs. So the iron absorption occurs according to the body requirements. If there is more iron in the intestine, the body will absorb only iron according to the body needs, and the remaining amount will be excreted in stools. The reducing substance like vitamin C increases the iron absorption. Also, vitamin C also increases calcium absorption. So the reducing substance increases, we have mentioned in calcium that the acidic pH increases calcium absorption. Also here, the reducing substance like vitamin C will also increase iron absorption. So vitamin C increases both iron and calcium absorption. The phosphate, oxalate, phytate, tannic acid, which is present in tea, calcium, even the calcium decreases iron absorption. So if iron and calcium are ingested at the same time, both of them, the absorption of both of them will decrease. So again, if in both calcium and iron are ingested together, the absorption of both of them will be decreased. And now, moving to important terms for lab investigations. The ferritin is the storage form of iron. It is present in tissues like intestinal mucosal cell, liver, kidney, bone marrow. So it is a storage form of iron. It's called ferritin. The transferrin is a transporter. Transferrin, so it's transporter. It's a plasma protein for transport of iron, for example, to bone marrow for hemoglobin synthesis. And lastly, what's called TIPIC. TIPIC means total iron binding capacity. Total iron binding capacity. This measures the total amount of iron that can be bound by proteins in the blood. So it measures the total amount of iron that can be bound by proteins in the blood. So it is an indirect indicator for transferrin. It measures the amount of transferrin available to bind to iron. Again, it measures the amount of transferrin available to bind to iron. So for example, if the TIPIC is low, this means that the amount of transferrin available to bind to iron is low. This means that the transferrin is saturated, so there is increased iron in this body, okay? On the other hand, if the TIPIC is high, this means that the amount of transferrin available to bind to iron is high, so there is iron deficiency, okay? Now moving to disorders of plasma iron level, there is two conditions: iron deficiency anemia, in which there is decreased iron, while increased iron is called hemosiderosis. Hemosiderosis means increased iron level. The iron deficiency anemia is caused by either inadequate intake of iron, or impaired absorption of iron. So either the iron is deficient in diet, or it's ingested in diet but it's not absorbed properly, or even if there exists blood loss, so it's present in diet, ingested and absorbed properly, and lastly it is lost, okay, excessive blood loss. While hemosiderosis increased iron. It may be caused by, we have mentioned that iron is absorbed according to the body needs only, and any remaining amount will be excreted in stool. So how is iron increased in the blood and in tissues? By repeated blood transfusion, excessive administration of injectable iron, or if there is inherited condition, inherited iron absorption, inherited increased iron absorption from the intestine. So either blood transfusion or injectable iron, or inherited increased absorption. As regards the biochemical changes, in iron deficiency anemia, the plasma iron is decreased and at the same time increased TYPIC. What is meant by increased TYPIC? Increase the amount of transferrin available for binding iron, because the iron is decreased, so there are many transferrin molecules available to bind iron. This is the increased TYPIC. While on the other hand, hemosiderosis, there is increased plasma iron and decreased TYPIC. What is decreased TYPIC? Decrease the amount of transferrin available to bind iron, because the transferrin is already saturated. So there is decreased amount of transferrin that is available to bind more iron. So this iron which is increased in the blood will be deposited in several organs. The most important organs is the liver, which leads to liver cirrhosis. So deposition of iron in the liver leads to liver cirrhosis. In pancreas, cause bronzed diabetes, and lastly in skin called bronzed pigmentation. So bronzed diabetes, bronzed pigmentation, and liver cirrhosis. So as regards the iron is absorbed in the upper small intestine according to the body needs. Vitamin C or reducing substance increases the iron absorption, while phytate, calcium, tannic acid, all of these decreases the iron absorption. As regards the terms important for lab investigation, we mentioned ferritin, which is a storage form of iron in spleen, liver, bone marrow, and several tissues in intestinal mucosal cell. The second one is the plasma protein, which is important for transport of iron, is called the transferrin. Transfer, transport of iron to bone marrow, for example, for hemoglobin synthesis. And lastly, TYPIC, total iron binding capacity, means the amount, it measures the amount of transferrin which is available to bind iron. Lastly, the disorders include iron deficiency anemia and hemosiderosis. The iron deficiency anemia means iron deficiency, so either inadequate intake or improper absorption or excessive loss. On the other hand, hemosiderosis due to excessive repeated blood transfusion or excessive injectable iron or inherited increased absorption. Iron deficiency anemia, so iron is low while the TYPIC is high. TYPIC is high due to increased the amount of transferrin available to bind iron. While hemosiderosis, there is increased iron, so increased plasma iron and decreased TYPIC, which indicates decreased amount of transferrin available to bind iron because the transferrin is already saturated. When the iron is increased, it becomes deposited in several organs like liver, pancreas, and skin. In liver, it causes liver cirrhosis. In pancreas, it causes bronzed diabetes, and in skin, it causes bronzed pigmentation. Now moving to copper. Copper is very important for hemoglobin synthesis. Bone formation, and also is important for nervous system, maintenance of the myelin sheath, which is the cover surrounding the nerve fibers. So it's important for myelination or myelin sheath, which is present in the nervous system. So it's important for bone, important for hemoglobin, and important for the nervous system, the myelin sheath. Also, it is a component or constituent of several enzymes, among which superoxide dismutase. This enzyme is very important in antioxidant activity, superoxide dismutase, and also cytochrome oxidase. So copper is very important constituent or component of superoxide dismutase and cytochrome oxidase. The superoxide dismutase is very important concerning the antioxidant activity. So again, copper is important in bone formation, in hemoglobin synthesis, maintenance of the myelin sheath in the nervous system, and lastly, component of superoxide dismutase and cytochrome oxidase. Moving to zinc. Zinc is very important in normal growth, reproduction, tissue repair, and wound healing. So it's very important for normal growth and reproduction, tissue repair and healing, wound healing. It's also important for regeneration of retinal pigments. Regeneration of retinal pigments. It helps in vitamin A mobilization from the liver in order to regenerate retinal pigments, so it has important role in vision. Also, zinc, remember zinc, In in the middle, so remember insulin storage and release. It has very important function in insulin storage and release because the insulin is stored in the form of zinc insulin complex. Also, the zinc is very important component or constituent of several enzymes, among which the superoxide dismutase, which also contains copper. So the zinc is important for normal growth and reproduction, tissue repair and wound healing, vision, important for regeneration of retinal pigments, insulin release and storage, component of superoxide dismutase. So it shares in antioxidant activity also. So if there is zinc deficiency, this leads to, it's important for normal growth, so it leads to growth retardation. It's important for wound healing, so there will be delayed wound healing. Also, it has important role in reproduction, so there is hypogonadism or impaired sexual development. So zinc is very important for normal growth and reproduction, vision, regeneration of retinal pigments, insulin storage and release. It's a component of superoxide dismutase, so it shares in antioxidant activity. Manganese is essential for, manganese contains N, so it's important for three functions which contain N. Normal bone structure, functions of the CNS, and again, like zinc, it has important role in spermatogenesis, so it has an important role in reproduction. So again, manganese is important for normal bone structure, functions of the CNS, and spermatogenesis. Iodine is important in the formation of thyroid hormones by thyroid gland. If there is iodine deficiency, the thyroid gland compensates by being enlarged in size. So the enlargement of thyroid gland leads to a condition called goiter. So if iodine deficiency is prolonged, it leads to goiter. So iodine is important for formation of thyroid hormones by thyroid gland, and if there is iodine deficiency, it leads to goiter. Fluoride is present mainly in bone and teeth. So it's protective against dental caries and also protective against osteoporosis and osteomalacia. So it's protective against dental caries and also protective against osteoporosis and osteomalacia, in which there is softening of bones and decreased bone density. Okay, so fluoride is important mineral in protection against dental caries and osteoporosis and osteomalacia. Selenium is a very important mineral as antioxidant mineral. It has antioxidant activity. So don't forget that selenium has antioxidant activity. It is a component of an enzyme called glutathione peroxidase. This enzyme has This enzyme has antioxidant activity. We have already mentioned the superoxide dismutase. This enzyme contains copper and contains zinc. Also, glutathione peroxidase, which contains the selenium, has important antioxidant activity. Okay, so don't forget that selenium, which is a component of glutathione peroxidase, has important function, which is antioxidant activity. Also, it's important in reproduction and has also immune function. It's important in reproduction and has immune function. Lastly, chromium and cobalt. Chromium is an important potentiator of insulin action. We have already mentioned that zinc also. Zinc is important for insulin storage and release. And now the second mineral which has relation also with insulin, chromium. Chromium is a potentiator of insulin action. It facilitates the binding to cell receptor, facilitates the binding of insulin to the cell receptor and the uptake of glucose. It facilitates the binding of insulin to its receptor and the uptake of glucose. So the chromium is very important mineral as a potentiator of insulin action. Cobalt, lastly, cobalt is a constituent of vitamin B12. Cobalt is a constituent of vitamin B. So now we have discussed the trace elements, beginning with iron. Iron is absorbed from the upper small intestine according to the body needs. We have mentioned that vitamin C or reducing substance increase iron absorption, while presence of tannic acid, calcium, phosphates, all of these decrease the iron absorption. Moving to the terms related to the lab investigations, the ferritin is the storage form of iron in liver, spleen, bone marrow, intestinal mucosal cell. The transferrin is a plasma protein responsible for transport of iron in the blood, for example, for bone marrow for hemoglobin synthesis. And typic total iron binding capacity measures the amount of transferrin available for binding iron. Moving to the disorders, iron deficiency anemia and hemosiderosis. Iron deficiency anemia is deficiency of iron either to inadequate intake, improper absorption, or excessive blood loss. Hemosiderosis due to repeated blood transfusion, excessive injectable iron, or inherited increased absorption of iron. Iron deficiency anemia, so the iron, the level of plasma iron is decreased while TBIC is increased. In the hemosiderosis, the plasma iron is increased, so the TBIC is decreased. Moving to zinc and copper. The copper is important for hemoglobin, as we mentioned. Copper P reminds me of B, hemoglobin, bone, the formation or maintenance of myelin sheaths in the nervous system, and lastly, component of superoxide dismutase. So it's important for hemoglobin, bone, nervous system, the maintenance of myelin sheaths, and superoxide dismutase. The zinc is important for normal growth and reproduction, tissue repair and wound healing, insulin storage and release, regeneration of retinal pigments, so it has important role in vision, and also it is a component of superoxide dismutase. So both copper and zinc are important components of superoxide dismutase, which reminds me of selenium. Selenium also is a component of glutathione peroxidase, which is also an important enzyme having antioxidant activity. So the three minerals, copper, zinc, and selenium, all of them have or share in the antioxidant activity. Copper and zinc are component of superoxide dismutase, copper and zinc superoxide dismutase, while selenium in glutathione peroxidase. Moreover, selenium has a role in reproduction and immune function. The manganese is important, has three important functions: bone, functions of the CNS, and spermatogenesis. All of them contain N. Manganese, Mn, so bone, CNS, and spermatogenesis. The iodine is important information of thyroid hormones. The fluoride is protective against dental caries, osteoporosis, and osteomalacia. And lastly, chromium and cobalt. Cobalt is a constituent of vitamin B12. Chromium is a potentiator of insulin action, which reminds me of zinc. Zinc also has important role in insulin storage and release. Hope you understand our lecture today. Inshallah, we will discuss it face to face, and we will have a discussion also. Thank you.